So we're in Matthew chapter 5 tonight. We've been talking about the words in red. We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount, the words of Jesus, and we've made our way down to about verse 38. Jesus covered so many subjects. Last week we talked about his teaching about adultery, the true meaning of what he meant by if your eye offends you to pluck it out, or if your hand offends you to cut it off. And we realize some have taken that literally and not known how to deal with it, but we covered that. So go back and watch last week's message on YouTube if you want to catch up. But now he moves to yet another subject. Again, this is just filled with the teachings of Jesus himself. He's going to interpret the law of retribution, something that Moses covered in the Old Testament, but he's going to give a new twist. We left off in verse 37 where he told us to not swear oaths, to not make that a normal practice in kingdom living, which is what we've been talking about. This entire discourse is on how to live in the kingdom here on earth, and the kingdom that is to come even. It has some similarities to that, but not to anything more than yes or no is the biblical standard, is Jesus' standard. Verse 37, let your communication yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever more than these cometh of evil. You know, it gets very confusing. I don't know if I mentioned this last week. It gets very confusing when you're not sure if a person's yes means yes, or if their no means no, because they add to it. For instance, if someone, I've read by experts of behavior, sometimes people who aren't telling the truth will go the extra step of trying to swear by something to convince you and I that what they're saying is true. And that can be a tip that what they're saying is not true. I mean, it's very confusing, but it really brings verse 37 into clear focus to me. If our yes is yes and our no is no, we don't have to say, I swear on a stack of Bibles this happened, or I swear to, we don't have to do that. If we're either telling the truth or we're not, but if we would keep the same level, well, yes or no, I can see how that would be the ultimate standard. Verse 37, and I see why Jesus said anything more than yes or no, you can get into evil territory, because someone can try to convince us too much, and we may fall guilty of the same thing. So now he takes on again. This is what they taught. They only had the Old Testament, so they taught the people the law of Moses, and he cites verse 38. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him too. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow, turn thou not away. Let's stop there for a second. The Mosaic Law did teach, Exodus 21, chapter 21, verse 24, clearly said that while the Israelites were living in community for the first time after leaving Egypt, and the law came out, if your neighbor, takes something from you, then he or she owes you, and vice versa. There was that Mosaic Law of Retribution, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Over time, however, and I've probably said this every week of our study, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, changed it and took that command out of the proper place that it should be taught. They took it out, a principle limiting retribution for civil government, and put it in the wrong sphere, personal relationships. See, there was a process when someone committed an act in the Old Testament. It would be judged by 2 or 3 witnesses. Remember, Moses himself would judge each thing that people had going on in their life. They would come to him, he himself, until his father-in-law finally said, hey, this is no good, this is going to wear you out. And then he appointed others to handle the smaller stuff, and then the major stuff, they would still come to him. But the whole matter is, they didn't just settle it on their own. Well, it had changed over time now in Jesus' day, where they'd want to settle it on their own without taking it to anyone else, or making sure that there were, someone had a witness to what you were saying. But more important than that, or at least equally important to that, I don't know that I've ever looked at it this way. In the Middle East, in that time, and even today, it is an insult to slap someone with the back of your hand, because that's a big insult over there. So what Jesus was saying is, when a person insults us, or a person insults them, doesn't have to be with a slap on the right cheek. We want to give them back what they gave to us and more. Our natural human flesh wants to strike back. Jesus was teaching that we should patiently bear insults and offenses, and not resist an evil person that insults us in whatever way they're insulting us. Don't limit your thinking to a slap. He was using that as an example because one Bible commentator pointed out that in the ancient Jewish writings, as I said, striking someone was a very severe insult and punishable by a heavy fine, according to one of the other Jewish books, especially with the back of the hand. Now, I hasten to add this. It's wrong to think Jesus was trying to teach that evil shouldn't be resisted. He demonstrated with his life that it should be and must be resisted. We only need to go to the turning over the tables and the money changers in the temple, that evil should be resisted. But what he's saying is that a true believer, a kingdom practice, has learned to resent no insult or seek retaliation for every little slight that comes our way. Now, that being said, that's hard to do. But think about how often Jesus himself, the sinless Son of God that had no carnal nature, was insulted. He was called a glutton, a drunk, an illegitimate child. He was called a blasphemer, a madman, on and on it goes. And he did not strike back or attempt to call names to the very people who were calling him that. It also is wrong to think that Jesus means that a physical attack shouldn't be defended against. So if someone puts their hands on you, now you can have your own code of how you feel about that. But what he's speaking of when he uses that slap on the right cheek, it was culturally understood that was a deep insult, not a physical attack. So I wanted to make sure we got that across tonight, because that's important. That's why we study. That's why we look into God's Word and have time to study like this. It was culturally understood that it was a deep insult he was talking about, not the striking. He doesn't mean, for instance, that if someone hits us across the right side of our head with a baseball bat, we should offer up our left. That's not what this was teaching. If a right-handed person strikes someone on their right cheek, presumably with the back of the hand, it was more insulting in that day than if you slapped someone with an open hand. I don't know. I don't know which way I'd like to be slapped. Back of the hand or front, both of them. I wouldn't like either. But it's I see some people practicing right now at their seats. But it's what he had in mind. It was that insult. Think of something today that is equally insulting to people and that we could relate to. So he goes on. Under the law of Moses, he quotes Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 24 about taking someone's coat. If someone asks you to give them your coat. Under the Mosaic Law, I said this last week, you couldn't take their last garment because they needed something for warmth in the evening. And they didn't have Hanes back then or Fruit of the Loom. They didn't have t-shirts on. So you needed to leave them with that. Jesus, if sued for their tunics, an inner garment like ours, they could gladly bear their outer, but here again, their outer coat. But again, even in a country where justice can be had, we are not to, he was teaching we shouldn't have to resort for every little personal wrong. We should rather strive to endure insults, put downs, someone asking something of us, positively If someone asks you to go a mile, he teaches go with him too. We're told to take command of evil impositions by trying to do more than what someone's required of us, if possible. Maybe you've had the experience of owing someone something and repaying them with more than what you owed them. Or maybe you didn't feel you owed them, but to keep things right or to make things right, you would give them more than what they asked for. Now, don't take that too far. I'll give you an example. We had a fellow at our meeting we went to last Friday night say that when you're trying to make amends with someone, he said, don't say you're sorry. People don't like to hear that in some ways. He said, instead, say, how can I make it right? Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I mean, all week I was thinking, oh, that's good. Instead of, I'm saying I'm sorry, say, why, I tried that on Liz. And you know what she said? I said, honey, I didn't even forget it doesn't matter what it was about. I said, and I started to say I'm sorry. I said, how can I make it right? She said, well, you can get the sweeper and you can sweep this room here and sweep that and then the dish. Now, that's not what that fellow meant last week. I'm going to tell him too this coming week on her. So hopefully someone doesn't do that to you. There's a real life situation. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you if you, instead of saying I'm sorry, just ask them, how can I make it right? How can I set things right? So Jesus is teaching that same attitude. Remember, at this time, Judea was under Roman occupation. And under military law, any Roman soldier could command a Jew to carry his backpack for a mile. That was Roman law. But only 1 mile. Jesus is teaching, go beyond the 1 mile required by the law, again, in the overall sense, and give another mile out of your perfect love. Sounds steep, but that's how we transform and attempt to manipulate us into a free act of love. I mean, just think about it. I'm sure we've all done it. It may be the exception, but I'm sure we've all done more. We probably didn't even think we owed that person what they asked us to do, but we ended up doing or giving more. And that really takes the starch out of whatever accusation they might have had against us, because we've not only repaid them, we've gone above and beyond that. So that's the attitude that he was teaching. Let's go on. Let's cover a little more than that. All right, here's a good one. It's probably all we'll have time for tonight. Verse 43. You have heard that it has been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thy enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies and bless them that curse you. Do good to them which hate you. Pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust. If you love only those which love you, what reward have you? Even the publicans do that, or do the same. Verse 48. 47, if you salute your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the publicans say hi to one another when they pass on the street? Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. I'll double check and look this up later, but there's a couple different words for perfect in the New Testament. One means complete. This one may mean more, strive to be like your Father, because to do what is told in those last few verses, is that not tough? Is that not hard? To love an enemy? Bless someone who's cursed you, despitefully used you, persecuted you. But in doing that, verse 45 implies that in doing that, we show that we're the children of God, that our Father's in heaven, that we have, because he makes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, the sun rises on the just and the unjust day after day, and then he uses the example that, just being nice or loving your friend, anybody can do that. But boy, to go out of your way and love, I mean, this goes far beyond, this goes beyond loving a neutral person. It'd be one thing, love your friends, of course, love your family, love a neutral person you just met, but love your enemies, love someone who's persecuting you or cussing you out, or you fill in the blank. Love them? Wow. The Mosaic Law commanded you shall love your neighbor, Leviticus 19:18. Yet some teachers in the day of Jesus added an opposite and misapplication by saying hate your enemy. That's where he got that from. You won't find that in the Old Testament, but that's what they added to it. So they're teaching the people, love your friends and hate your enemies. So Jesus corrected that. They generally looked upon, for instance, anyone who was uncircumcised, not as their neighbors, but their enemies. So they didn't feel like they had to love them. Well, they're not a Jew, they're not circumcised. I don't have to extend them the love. But Jesus, he's correcting all that. So I hope we're seeing deeper into this than what we might have seen before we studied it. He reminds us that God means all people are our neighbors. And to fulfill this law, we must love, bless, do good, and pray for our enemies, not just our friends. Very difficult, I understand. But if in doing that, it shows, he says, the ear of our Heavenly Father, which is in heaven. So it's an example. Remember, he's teaching the character of citizens of the kingdom. We should expect that this kingdom living would be different than what's seen in the world. I mean, there are many good reasons why more should be expected from kingdom or Christians than anyone else. We claim to have something others don't have as believers, don't we? We claim to be renewed, repentant, and redeemed. Well, shouldn't a renewed, repentant, and redeemed people live differently than the rest of the world? We do have something that people should want to have. There's a power that we have helping us to go on that others don't have, because the Bible says we can do all things through Christ. If they don't have Christ, they can't do and follow that as we can. We have the Spirit of God dwelling in us. So, and we have a better future. So, if a man, I'll close with this tonight, then we'll discuss it. If a person could live the exact way Jesus was teaching here, he or she probably would be pretty close to perfect. That type of person would never hate, slander, or speak evil of another person. Would never lust in his or her heart or covet anything. This is covered in this whole chapter. A person would never make a false oath. They would always be completely truthful. Would never defend his or her personal rights and not take it upon him or herself to defend those rights, but allow God to totally defend them. Would not just love his neighbors, but would also love his enemies. So, get the idea? Get the point? It goes a little bit deeper than just a casual reading of chapter 5.